Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
Hello, hello. Well, we've reached the last Conveyancing Matters of 2020. Hello, Stu.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. And I'm really delighted that we've got Conveyancing Supremo himself, Mr. Rob Hailstone, with us. I'm so pleased you could join us, Rob. Hello.
Hello. Well, I'm not sure I can agree with the title, but I'm very grateful. Thank you. Hi.
I saw you talked about the other day on social media as Conveyancing Chief, and I think, yeah, that's about right, Rob. Come on.
Chief.
I think that's an estate agent journalist who's been using that for some reason. I'm not paying him.
That's good stuff. The first thing I've got to ask, I want you to talk a little bit about Rob, about Bold Legal Rob, just in case there's one viewer who doesn't know what it is. But I've got to say first, train going by, got to be the best office that we've had on. And of course, the fantastic thing, Rob, is that's not a Zoom background. That's your actual office. Tell us quickly about it.
Well, we moved to Torquay. Lynn and I moved to Torquay about a year ago, and we were going up to Exeter on the train. Came up to the station and saw the old signal box with the to let sign on it, and it's 2 stories, 2 floors, about 20 foot square each floor. I phoned up the company and said how much. They told me. In fact, I'll tell you, it was $3.5 grand a year.
Fantastic.
I put in a bid slightly higher. I got it. It's got obviously it's got internet. It's got heating. It's got lighting. Got facilities, it's got a little kitchen area. Going by, and I'm about 200 yards from the sea as well.
Oh, fantastic. But I have got to ask, Rob, just before we move into the serious stuff of 2020, which is what we're going to be talking about, what on earth are the little gold moving things behind you?
Well, they're the Chinese cats that go like that.
Okay.
They're for the train drivers and the tourists that come to Torquay.
They are slightly distracting from this angle, I've got to say.
There's also a little Santa jigging away there.
That's the thing. Santa jigging. What more could we want for the Christmas Conveyancing Matters? So, Rob, we clearly have had such a, conveyancers have had such a tumultuous year. So it did seem quite right and proper that lovely you join us to have a talk about that. But tell us a little bit to start with about Bold Legal and kind of what you do for conveyancers and how completely invaluable you are to coalface conveyancers, Rob.
God, you do build me up a bit, don't you? Okay, well, very briefly, I was a coalface conveyancer for 30 years. I gave up in 2005 and got involved in home information packs. I set up a pack production company with O.J. Straker. That was all going extremely well until the government scrapped HIPs. I then, we made our 12 staff redundant. They made myself and my wife redundant. I came back to Devon with my tail between my legs. I thought, what can I do next? As most people would agree, 30 years at the coalface of conveyancing is quite a lot. And I decided to set up the Bold Group. Now, Bold was supposed to stand for Bundle of Legal Documents because I still wanted to produce a pack. After a few months, I worked out that most people didn't want the mandatory pack, so very few would want the voluntary pack. So I thought, well, how can I assist conveyancers at the moment? And what came out then, back in the day, was the new Sra Handbook, which was a 700, well, they call it a handbook. It was 700 pages. I thought I'll condense that down for conveyancers, and I actually condensed it down to 300 pages on a very manual basis, and a few firms paid me for that. Then we got involved in the HSBC issue when they reduced their panel, and I became a bit of a thorn in their side, and the membership grew then. And over the years, it's just grown from a handful of firms up to the 650, 700 firms we've got now, from, sole practitioners up to the big volume players and many in between. What I originally did was I sent out a weekly bulletin to them. They call me their eyes and ears, so I keep an eye out for the things that perhaps they should know about, but don't always have the time to spot and pick up and look at. I.e. SRA fraud alerts, HM land registry updates, new cases per unseen dream bar, all those sorts of things that go on. So I put those in a bulletin every week. But also what was nice is that members would send in a question. I'd put that question in the bulletin anonymously. Then usually after the bulletin went out, 2 or 3 people would come back and say, I had the same problem last week or last month. This is how I dealt with it. I'd send those replies to the original person who put the question in anonymously, and then I'd put them in the next bulletin so everybody could share the question and the answers. And that's rolled over now pretty much for nearly 10 years, I think, which is, the amount of questions. I always think the last bulletin is going to be the last bulletin, but there's always more questions. Very briefly, we also have a training, the LG training thing, a system online system. I set a test every 2 months. If you take the tests and get 8 out of 10 questions right, the system will print off a certificate, which you can then keep in your folder for CPD requirements, or show to future employers, or show to your PI brokers, etc., etc. It isn't flying off the shelf because the SRA decided to change the CPD regulations.
Yeah, tell me about it.
We've got about 70 firms who are using it at the moment on a regular basis. And then finally, in March of this year, February, just before lockdown, I decided to introduce an online forum. I've been thinking about it for years, but I don't know, something happened and I did it. And it's brilliant. We get so much interaction. We've got 350 firms signed up to that. And it's a 24/7 service now. You can post your question when you want. Usually somebody will answer within 2 or 3 hours, and then there'll be a little discussion going. And then I summarize all the questions and answers in the bulletin on a Monday. I mean, all this really is more luck than judgment, how I've got to this position. But I'm here. I'm grateful. I'm not counting my chickens, and I will keep working hard next year.
Oh, well, I think, I think you'd say the same, Stu, wouldn't you? Having sort of, updates from Rob is just been a bit really essential sort of right now, particularly.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think you've put that down a bit there, Rob. I think it's a lot more than luck's involved. I've been sort of crying out for years, back before the Bold Group started, that there never really was a voice for the conveyancing industry. With what you do, it doesn't discriminate between CLC or SRA. It's literally a common voice, isn't it, for the good of the whole industry. That's the difference. It's not necessarily strictly about regulation. It covers all problems that, whether it be, like you say, a big firm may have, or a small firm, or an individual conveyancer just trying to get on, their daily role. So it covers all, encompasses everything, doesn't it?
It does. It's a very broad church. And what's interesting is that you might get a sole practitioner ask a question. You might get a conveyancing factory practitioner answer that question. They would never normally talk to each other, but because it's anonymous, they lap it up and they love it. So we can't. I have to say, I sit on the fence a lot to keep things even on an even keel. I've got a few splinters in my rear end, but it's working.
I think that's actually an important point, Rob, isn't it? There, as Stu said, that there's that element of neutrality, and obviously the sort of the quite literally honest broker thing, which then enables you to, perhaps you tell us about, sort of the lobbying aspect, which frankly, most of us are, we're all regulated, and we feel that our regulators or our professional bodies don't necessarily do that particularly effectively. And you've, talked about you come up with the COVID clauses earlier in the year, you put the letter together to lobby the government on the stamp duty land tax holiday. So, tell us a bit about that, because the point of this Conveyancing Matters is to have a bit of a, chew the fat a bit about, the 2020 we've had. So tell us about those.
Yeah, I mean, the lobbying, I'm not alone with that, but because the Bold Group is now such a big group, we get invited along by anybody who is lobbying, whether it's sometimes the Law Society or the Conveyancing Association or the New Home Buying and Selling Group, which I'm a participant like a lot of people. And somebody might start the initiative, then we all get together and we work on these letters together. Sometimes it might be my initiative, but more often than not it's somebody else's. But we do, as an industry, try and work together. We've got many different types of firms and practices, as we say, from sole practitioners up to the volume conveyancers. They don't always get on, and there's good and bad in both. But I feel like we're on a big ocean, a choppy ocean at the moment, in different boats, and we need to help each other until that choppy ocean settles down a bit and we can go off in our own directions.
Well, certainly, Stu, you've noticed, working, and running a big organisation, just the the issues that conveyancers are having right now. I mean, we've talked about it a lot, but we can't ignore it, talking about this today.
No, we certainly can't. I mean, it's been probably, the biggest year, certainly in my lifetime, that the industry's ever faced. In the back of Brexit, that's now sort of a distant memory, to sort of, the first lockdown when the industry went very quiet, and of course now extreme volumes that, all firms really are trying to process, and coupling that with the stamp duty holidays making things extremely difficult, difficult for everybody that's here. And I don't really know any firms that are having an easy time at the moment. And, linking that to Rob maybe, I've always said that what I feel has been missing for a long time is that voice, is that sort of defence of conveyancers. And that's where I think Rob comes in. I think Rob recognises the problems that exist within the industry, and whether you call it lobbying or trying to help in whatever way, that's the services that the Bold Group provides. And, I'd forgotten all about HSBC and the fact that they decided overnight, without telling anybody, that they were going to take, all of us off their panels, and we suffered. And now you've mentioned it, I remember that. I remember it well. And I know you've helped us out in a few things in the past, and we've had a few issues with banks and stuff like that. So, it's somebody else you can rely on that I don't think necessarily you can get from your regulator.
No, and I think sometimes it's a lot more than the bulletins and the forum as well. Sometimes a firm will contact me direct with a specific problem, and I'll go to a lender, whether it's a Nationwide or someone, and say, look, this firm's got this problem, or to the land registry, and I'll resolve that behind the scenes. And I think sometimes I don't shout about that enough, really, for my own purposes, but I settle all those sorts of things. The other day, we had an interesting one. One of our sponsors had an issue with a law firm. They were going to go to court. They were going to sue each other. I got involved. I negotiated a settlement. They saved themselves thousands of pounds. Now, I'm not doing that every day for everybody, but it's these little things that go on in the background that keep me really busy.
You see, that's really interesting, Rob, because I had no clue that you did that. And I think that's a hugely interesting, important, valid service. It's extraordinary.
It's a funny old group, really, because as I said, we've got about 650, 700 firms. I probably only ever hear from about 100 firms every year. So a lot of them get the bulletins. They must read the bulletins because they renew their membership. Most of them are not vocal. It's always the same 50 or 100 who ask the questions, answer the questions. But the others must be getting an awful lot of benefit from this. Otherwise, they wouldn't renew their membership. It's not on a direct debit. It's not on a standing order. We send them an invoice and they renew. So I'm quite glad in a way that all 650 don't email me at the same time and say, unless it's the same problem, of course.
Yeah, tell us about it. So, Rob, clearly, the unprecedented pressure, as Stu's mentioned, that conveyancers are under this year, this latter half of this year, it sounds really glib to say goes without saying. Of course, it doesn't go without saying. People are just under extraordinary pressure. But I thought it might be interesting for you to maybe pick out for us, what have been the top sort of 2 or 3 issues of concern to conveyancers apart from the workload that have sort of come out of the forum this latter half of the year? What have been the issues that have been sort of vexing your members?
Well, I had a quick scan through the forum topics and the BLG bulletins before we recorded this. And I'm just looking at my list here. So I'll just read out the list and then we can pick them off in any particular order if you want to. So building society issues, the COVID clause issues, the PII increases, the SDLT holiday, of course, MDR claims, cladding, stroke EWS1, and of course the workload and the mental health issues that are going on out there. Though I'd say those are the top 7 or 8 that have come up in the last 6 to 8 months.
So what have you noticed in particular, Rob? What's the groundswell feeling about the PII increase in particular? You tend to hear about, the odd 1 or 2 on social media, but what's your impression, having access to a lot of firms?
The firms are worried that they're too busy with conveyancing at the moment to shout too loudly about it. I had a sole practitioner, I think it was, email me the other day, and he said, look, I've had no claims this year. My premium's just gone up by 52%. Now that's an awful lot of money for a small firm, an awful lot of money for a big firm as well. So the PI issue, but I spoke to a couple of brokers about it, and this is the worrying thing. They have said that insurance companies are moving away from conveyancing. There's going to be fewer insurance companies out there. And as a result, premiums will be going up and they will be looking more closely at, particularly at conveyancing firms. So all I would say to conveyancers is, and I know that the brokers say this every year, make sure you complete your form properly. Make sure you complete your form professionally. Don't leave out any minute detail. If you're a CA member, if you're a BLG member, whatever you do to enhance your your knowledge, your training, your education about the job you do and keep up to date. Put it in the proposal form, because all those things make a difference, or hopefully will make a difference when it reaches the insurance company. Next year is going to be tough, without doubt. The PI premiums are not going to be nice. So make sure you get onto those proposal forms. Don't fill them in pen. Don't fill them in pencil. If there's a mistake, start and do it again. Make it look like it's the best job application you've ever submitted.
Oh, that's interesting. And Stu, what's been your experience as a matter of interest?
You know, funny enough, I would massively echo that, and not really a tip as such, but what we've done here, we've actually pre-prepared a PCS indemnity insurance renewal form that is purely for us, and that contains absolutely everything, not just, you know, that one company wants. It's that all the companies we will approach, we know exactly what they want, what they prefer, so that the moment we get that email asking us to renew ours, then I'll be submitting that within minutes, because last year was very difficult. We were one of the firms that suffered. Our insurance went up ×3, so I wasn't particularly pleased. And the reasons for the increase seem to be, you know, there's not such an appetite now to provide indemnity insurance by the insurers. I think the volume of claims across the industry as a generalisation are going to go up, and will only go up again next year. And I suppose with COVID, you know, again, insurers are going to perceive that as more risk orientated. And also new build seems to be the real flavour that they want to talk about. You know, if you do volumes of new build, you're cursed, because it means automatically they're going to whack it up, which unfortunately we do lots of new build, and that was one of the reasons ours went through the roof. So yeah, it's not nice, and it's a difficult sort of proposal to put together at the best of times. And I think having everything preset is always a good idea, so that when it does come up, which is sort of May for licensed conveyancers, you're sort of sitting there ready to fire it back.
So despite the fact how busy, despite the fact how busy firms are, they need to be starting those forms like sort of months in advance, really.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, lots of the information is preset information that you give every single year. You know, what's your name, what's your date of birth, when did you open the practice, what's your license number, blah 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 blah. You know, you can have all this preset in an Outlook, you know, spreadsheet. You know, just basically copying the forms that you've had, you know, year upon year, so that the information's all sitting there. Just makes it such a, you know, a less of a big task, shall we say, rather than sort of the dread when it comes through and trailing through the pages of it and digging up all the old information. So we've got ours already now preset.
But you're dead right. So you mentioned the COVID situation. I know some of the proposal forms now have got new sections in them covering the COVID situation. So you've got to make sure that you know how to answer questions about your workforce working from home. Is it security safe, et cetera? Are they being supervised? Get ready to try and get hold of the proposal form as soon as you can, so you can look at those questions and answer them correctly and thoroughly.
One of the difficulties we had as well is that once we'd sent our forms off, we didn't hear anything. So we were very naive in that. I was very naive in that I probably left it far too long before I chased it up. So again, by leaving it, you're at the back of the queue straight away. So I think it's a job that unfortunately you have to jump on straight away now, and you've got to be regularly chasing it, because you do not want to be sort of, you know, the clock does not want to be ticking, and you're still sort of faffing about and having to make decisions and having to agree something that you might not want to.
Do the indemnity insurers want to know whether and if so, how many people have been on furlough? And for how long? Is that an indicator, particularly in the market that we've got now, where, you know, conveyancers, as we know, are doing sort of 14, 15, 16-hour days. So there really shouldn't be anybody on furlough now. Do the insurers want to know that sort of thing?
I think they do, but you can be sure they're watching the legal and estate agency press now, and know what kind of pressure the law firms and the practitioners are under. And they'll all be thinking, everybody's working really, really hard 24/7. Mistakes might be made. Understandably, so you've got to be careful. You know, as I think you said in other these discussions, you know, put your fees up and reduce your workload at the moment if you can. Don't take on too much, because you will end up making a mistake.
Yeah, well, funny enough, I mean, we're going to have another chat looking ahead to 2021, and I don't want to be sort of depressing, but I suspect, Rob, that probably in sort of 6-12 months time, particularly with your position in the market, you're going to start to see, unfortunately, the sort of fallout from this period. Because I can't help but think and agree with you that, there are going to be more claims. There are, because frankly, more balls will have been dropped.
Well,
understandably by conveyancers, but nonetheless.
I've already seen a few more retirements, a few more firms close, and a few more mergers than I would have done in the past.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, Rob, what else? What else has taken your fancy in terms of sort of top topics? Really, what else have you seen on the forum?
Well, the tricky one is cladding. US one form. There's no immediate answer to that. We can't, I don't think, go into real detail here. It's a big problem for any chain where there's a leasehold property over 18 meters or whatever it might be, or a combustible balcony. There was a shortage of surveyors, and then the insurers didn't want to insure the surveyors. It's getting more and more complicated. I was on a Zoom call with Ricks and a few others a week or so ago. They're hoping to bring some good news or better news to the marketplace in the first half of the first quarter of next year about EWS1 generally. But well, as Stu, he's nodding his head there, it causes a lot of problems for a lot of people at the moment.
Definitely. It just seems to be there's not enough knowledge out there about the issue, and it seems to be a grey area to me as to sort of where, as a lawyer, your responsibility lies, because the banks are the ones that have the prime concern, and I think historically, to start with, it was always, well, the banks aren't going to issue a mortgage offer if there's not the relevant cladding information. But of course, now it's going back to that same old adage that we talk about all the time, and it's, hang on a minute, let's push it back to the lawyers. They've got insurance. We can sort of alleviate some risk here.
And whatever the rules and regulations are, the banks, the lenders will do their own thing anyway. And if they want to protect their security in a different way to the rules and regulations, they will say they want to protect their security in a different way, and you've got to, dance to their tune.
Well, that was a sort of classic, thing that came out of the sort of semi-announcement 2 or 3 weeks ago, wasn't it, Rob? That strange announcement came out from the government on, I think, a Saturday evening, as I recall, sort of saying, "Oh, hurrah, hurrah! If the building hasn't got cladding, you won't need a certificate." Well, the lenders, the lenders have joined in with this press release, and the lenders immediately came out and said, "Well, firstly, no, we haven't." And then they said, rather scarily for the rest of us, "Oh, and by the way, there might be cladding behind the brickwork that nobody can see, or, there might be fire risks behind the brickwork that nobody can see. And as you say, if we don't want to lend, we're not going to lend."
Yeah, it was a bizarre announcement. It was the opposite to a storm in a teacup. It was it was a calm sea in a teacup. It meant absolutely nothing.
I must admit, I thought, because it was a Saturday night, it was probably the middle of lockdown, so I hadn't been out. So I wasn't even sort of, 3 San Miguel's in and not really caring. And I thought, well, have I read that properly? Is this? And I wondered, is this a completely non-announcement? And I felt that it was, really, because it didn't actually address the point of concern.
Yeah, I think the other big issue is COVID clauses and simultaneous exchanges and completions. And again, I think you've touched on this in previous recordings. It's still a bit of an issue, but I think the majority now, and she will be able to confirm, I suppose, or deny, the majority now are preferring SIMs, which a lot of people don't want for obvious reasons. You're not 100% sure you can book your van, 100% sure you're going to move on the day. And if you've got a particularly nasty buyer at the bottom or seller at the top, they could say on the day, right, I want £5,000 off, or I'm not going to exchange and complete today. It puts one at risk. But then equally, exchanging with a COVID clause that has not been tried and tested in court may put one at risk as well. It's a difficult one to call.
Well, we characterised it when we chatted about it, didn't we, Stu, as the least worst option.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody's ever said this is a great option. It's just always the least worst.
I think on the ground, I would say, from what I see, the demand for clients to move is so great now that there's an element of not caring. The demand is that big for them to move, and the stress levels in terms of the moving process and getting it done, and the implications of mortgage offers expiring, maybe the inability to get them, renewed or extended, is that great now that most clients, or certainly a here at PCS, most would forego a COVID clause. Probably, I would say most, again, are electing just to exchange with a fixed date, in the future, despite the world we live in. And I think also as well, it's, this lockdown is completely different to the last one. People weren't really moving in the last lockdown, but of course this one, the industry is still fully functioning, so to speak.
Yeah, and that sort of leads us on in a way to what building societies are or aren't doing at the moment. And that's one of the items on my list. We've all seen and read about the horror stories of trying to get through to the lender on the phone for a redemption figure, or have you got the cot? Is the money being approved? Is it going to come through on time? 2 or 3 hours on the phone, and that's hundreds of firms, if not thousands of firms. It's a crazy situation.
It's weird, right? When I say to somebody that we've been on hold for 5 hours, okay, everyone said that's impossible. What an exaggeration! Typical man exaggerating that is. 5 hours. So we now virtually screenshot how long we've been on hold to try and justify what we are doing. And COVID clauses, we need sort of receiving a mortgage clause. It's getting that bad that you come to completion. Your biggest fear now is the bank not being able to get your redemption figure or not being able to deliver the mortgage advance. It was only yesterday, bearing in mind I'm not sort of front end in terms of dealing with completions, but I noticed yesterday Halifax in particular were sort of disclaiming when we would receive the money. So for anybody that doesn't know, 99% of the time you need to give a bank a clear week notice to guarantee receiving the funds. And for the first time yesterday, I noticed that Halifax were disclaiming that. So they were actually saying, even if you've given us a week's notice, we can't guarantee giving you the money on a set date. I was like, Christ, how many of these are knocking around? Because, we should be advising our clients. But that was received after we'd exchanged, after we'd ordered our mortgage advance. So
one of the things that a lot of conveyancers, perhaps who are less experienced than we all are, also won't realise, and you've just triggered me thinking about that, Stu, is that of course at the point at which you submit your certificate of title, actually all your ducks should be in a row. So the transaction should be complete. You should be essentially ready to exchange and complete. You shouldn't be preemptively asking for the money and waiting for some replies to inquiries and waiting for a search result and still trying to resolve an issue from the other side. You should be completion ready.
That's what your report says. That's what you are when you sign that certificate of title, you are giving the certificate to the bank that everything is cushy and you are ready to rock and roll. There shouldn't be things outstanding at that point.
But I reckon most firms will have been preemptively banging those off and not thinking about it.
I would have to say, though, from a practical sort of standpoint, it's very, very difficult, to balance demand of a client, to balance the complexities now of getting money in. It used to be bad as it was, but now, if you said to, a layperson that we have to send these things predominantly by fax, they won't accept emails. You have to send it by fax, and it takes 5 days for it to be delivered. And of course, then the client rings up the bank and says, will it take this long? And the bank says, no, they can have it whenever they ask for it. And you think, and the fact that you have to hold for that length of time, it's incredible. We have phones in the office now sitting on desks that are literally for the purpose of being on hold. It really is a crazy, crazy, crazy world.
And if I remember correctly, RA Legal and Santander, in the judgment, it said you should not submit your cot until you're exchange ready.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, it's ready.
Absolutely. Well, we could sort of talk all day to you, Rob. That's, I have to be honest and say perhaps a slightly sort of downbeat, look back at 2020. But what would be, so, perhaps to conclude this Conveyancing Matters chat, Rob, what are your sort of closing thoughts as we reach the end of 2020? What have you got to tell?
I think to try and finish on an upbeat mood, when we went into first lockdown in March and we had 3 or 4 months in lockdown, I could see, and most of us could see, hundreds, if not thousands of firms going out of business by the end of the year. The market absolutely flew in June. It was going to fly anyway, it seems. It flew even higher because of SDLT. So I think come the end of this year, most firms will have as much, if not more money in the bank than they did last year.
Yeah.
That's one of the bonuses. And the other thing, and for me, and I'm sure for others, I'm sat here talking to you now in my little signal box in Devon. I probably would have gone up to a meeting in London to do this. I saved myself quite a lot of money not traveling since March, and there must be others who are doing the same thing. So there are some bright sides to it. I think we'd rather not have had it, but we can learn a lot from it. And if we get through it, we'll be fitter and stronger, and the future is bright, as they say.
I think the industry will benefit from this, because I think, people's expectations now are so much higher. And of course, what people forget is law firms are trying to match those expectations. So I think when we look back in years to come, I think you generally will find that the process is probably slightly slicker. And I think working procedures within practices will be better, such as carrying out regular Zoom calls, such as, being paperless. I wouldn't mind betting that more firms this year will have gone paperless than at any time before, through obvious reasons, i.e. working from home and so on and so forth. So, like you say, Rob, it's difficult, isn't it? There's lots of industries out there at the moment, retail, travel, leisure, that are really, really suffering. And of course, there's an element of us poor lawyers all moaning, got too much work, blah, blah, blah. Well, of course, at the end of the day, they're going through, we're getting paid. And quite rightly, we're probably going to have more money in the bank than we would have done in previous years. So there are positives. It's just sometimes we need to sort of maybe adjust our position on it.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Stu. Well, thanks ever so much for that, Rob. As I say, really, really interesting. And thanks for bringing your bold legal insights to Conveyancing Matters for us. As I say, 2020, well, it has been a year like no other. And let's hope we don't have to say that again in 12 months' time. So thanks ever so much for joining us, Rob. And we'll hopefully see you soon.
Many thanks for the invite.
Take care.
Take care.